Welcome into the third AVR Synopsis. If you've joined before, you can see this version is a little different. We wanted to create more of a community feel, so we're doing it as a meeting rather than as a webinar. We do ask for everybody to just mute yourselves during the conversation so that the focus can be on the speaker. And then if you have a question, please feel free to either, at the end, we'll have a Q&A, either enter your question into the chat, or if you'd like to, sorry, I'm just admitting a few guests, so I'm a little distracted. If you'd like to ask the question yourself, just type into the chat that you have a question you'd like to ask, and then we'll go ahead and call on you and you can unmute yourself at that time. But that is all from me. My name is Catherine, and if you have any questions for me, you can just chat it into the box. I'm just hosting this meeting, and now I would like to introduce Aristidis Logothetis, the Executive Director of ARCAthens.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you everyone for joining us today for a third synopsis, the culminating event of the ARCAthens virtual residency. A program we started in 2020 as a response to the pandemic and social distancing, and also as an effort for ARCAthens to expand our digital support of artists, curators, and scholars beyond their physical residencies. The concept of the AVR is to provide two artists, one in Greece and the other in the Bronx, the opportunity and support to engage in a visual cross-cultural conversation by taking over the ARCAthens Instagram account, taking turns daily, posting images of their work, but not only. The fellows create a visual and narrative dialogue expressing their concerns during this moment in time. With this program, we intend to bridge the constraints imposed by the pandemic, inviting artists to challenge their isolation, freely discuss their hopes and fears, and find insights and resources through a compelling exchange of ideas. This Instagram conversation, as well as a video of this synopsis, is archived on a dedicated page on our website, and I'm pleased with how nicely the entire residency is laid out. I encourage you to visit us at arcathens.org and see it for yourselves. The third AVR is a little different from the first two in that we're supporting three fellows, two visual artists and a curator. First, I'd like to introduce you to the curator, Eleni Riga, chosen through an internal nomination process, who was then free to choose the two artists of the residency. We're obviously very pleased with their excellent choices. Eleni Riga is an independent curator and co-founder of the art and research platform HD Kepler. In 2020, she was a Stavros Niarchos Fellow working at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where she conceived the public program on the intersection of ecology and feminism, ecologia and feminismo. Previously, she worked as Director of Contemporary Art at Elusa's 2021 European Capital of Culture, where she established the Artist Residency Initiator, and as a curatorial assistant at Documenta 14. She has collaborated with many institutions in Greece, France, Switzerland, such as the Cadist Art Foundation, Palais de Tokyo, Festival, Antigel, etc. She holds a Master in Curatorial Studies from the Université de Paris, Sorbonne, and has previously studied communication, media, and culture at Pantheon University in Athens. She's above all a woman, a daughter, a sister, and a person from the South. And Elia Alba is a multidisciplinary artist living in the Bronx and working in photography, video, and sculpture. Elia received her Bachelor of Arts from Hunter College and completed the Whitney Museum Independent Study Program. She has exhibited at the Studio Museum in Harlem, Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam, Science Museum London, Smithsonian Museum of Art, Smithsonian Museum of Art, and Museo del Barrio, Ital Cultural Institute in Sao Paulo, National Museum of Art, Reina Sofia, Madrid, and the 10th Havana Biennale. She's the recipient of the Studio Museum in Harlem Artisan Residence Program, a Paula Krasner Foundation grant, and a Joan Mitchell Foundation grant, a Lower Manhattan Cultural Council Workspace Program, and an Anonymous Was a Woman Award. Collections include the Smithsonian Museum of Art, El Museo del Barrio, Loyo Art Museum. And her book, The Supper Club, critically acclaimed by the New York Times, brings together artists, scholars, and performers of diasporic cultures through photography, food, and dialogue to examine race and culture in the United States. She's currently guest curator for El Museo del Barrio's upcoming survey of contemporary Latinx art, Estamos Bien, La Trienal, opening in March 2021. And our third fellow, Maro studied fine arts in France and Germany and has been dividing her life between Greece and France. Maro has participated in numerous solo shows and group exhibitions in Greece, Europe, USA, and Turkey, and has repeatedly collaborated with important theatrical directors and institutions for the creation of stage environments, such as the National Theatre in Athens, Epidaurus Festival, Dionysus Stegi, and Pouria Theatre. Many of her works have been acquired by significant public and private collections, such as Fonds National d'Art Contemporain, Istanbul Modern, and the Dakis Daskalopoulos collection. This is a brief bio on our three wonderful fellows, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Eleni Riga, the curator.
Hi, hello, good afternoon. I'd like to encourage you, if you are not on mute, to do so I don't hear my voice 2 times. It's kind of distracting. Thank you. Thank you, Aristides. Thank you for the continuous encouragement. Thank you for this initiative, introducing this virtual residency during very difficult times. I should remind you, if you don't already know that we are under lockdown. So I'm grateful not only about the material support, but also for creating opportunities to meet and exchange. In times we might feel isolated and lonely. I just came back to Athens from New York, so this residency was very beneficial during my transition. And as you said, and I'd like to repeat it, it was important for me to have a pre-residency time in a way, to have the opportunity to choose the artists. I value this time because I had the chance to examine numerous portfolios from Bronx-based artists. And I'd truly love to meet some of them in person, maybe in the near future. So I had the chance to think of possible pair of artists and styles, pretty much as I would do for an exhibition, set intentions and think about the message that I would like to transmit through this residency and the platform I was given. And I'm so happy that Elia and Maro so gracefully accepted this invitation and engaged in this dynamic visual dialogue that we all witness on Instagram. And I surely have learned so much from both of them, and you and Kat and everybody who's here today. So I'll share my screen and I'll share some images with you. So please bear with me as I do so. So slideshow. So I'm not going to talk about each one of the things that you are going to see on your screen. I'm going to mention a few things about my experience as a curator and art professional. I was born in the south of Greece. I studied in Athens and in Paris, curatorial studies and curation, and cultural studies, I'm sorry. And I started working back in the 2000s. So the first exhibition is an exhibition I curated as a young professional in 2015. It's a group show. The exhibition is entitled Remediate the Everyday, and it's about how gestures evolved with technology and shape our everyday life. Next, here are some images from artworks, mostly performances and time-based events from Documenta 14 in Castle in Athens, where I worked as a curatorial assistant with the curator Pierre Balblanc. Our collaboration has been fundamental for me. In the core of these works, we find bodies perceived as living currencies, resisting in the norms that are imposed on them. For me, the body is very important, is a very important element, and I see it as a living architecture. Here is a performance I created back in 2018, going from where we come from with Maëlle Gross in the neighborhood of Le Paquis in Geneva, where we worked with migrant mothers and sex workers. It was a very poetic work about inclusive societies and a great lesson for me. I'd like to say that I like to work very slowly with cycle of exhibitions. This is a series of exhibitions that started with the publication Ecology of Gaze by the platform HD Kepler that I co-founded and curated until very recently. It's 5 years work. Attention is an Exercise was a series of exhibitions about care and attention with Yorgos Palamaris, Becky Campbell, and Elisabeth Sfiri. This is some images from the launch of publications in Athens with a performance by Paki Vlasopoulou. And here we see some images from the exhibitions. In case you haven't realized it yet, working in the public space is very important for me. I like to work in open air spaces, unconventional spaces, everyday spaces. I like it when people don't have necessarily to open a museum or a gallery door to get inside. I have been working between curation and education, and inclusion is a very important element for me. So here are some projects I curated as director at Ellipsis 2021. Also, another element is that I usually curate performances, time-based events, and conversation, not only exhibitions in the strict sense. So these photos are from the night of ideas with thinkers, scientists, and performers. And here are some images from Initiator Residency of Installation Art that I conceived based on the features of the town. It's a post-industrial migrant town with environmental problems. People are quite familiar with installation art, and this residency encouraged emerging artists to work and engage with the citizens. The exhibition was available and accessible 24 hours every day. And the most recent chapter, my one pandemic year in the US, where with the help of my colleagues in the education department of the Museum of Modern Art, I started a research in performance art in the public space in Guatemala in the 2000s as a response to the violence of the Civil War. And this is a public conversation I conceived and invited the Cisneros curator Ines Katzenstein and the artist Regina Jose Galindo. We examined the practices of the artists Ana Medieta and Regina Jose Galindo through ecology and feminism. So now currently I'm working on an exhibition on how politics are inscribed on all bodies that will take place hopefully in Athens in 2021. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll get back to your faces. I hope I didn't exceed my time. So now you have a little bit more ideas what I'm talking about and what I like to do in my work. And I'd like to give the floor to the fellow artists Elia, Alba, and then Maro, who will introduce themselves, their practices, and their experience at ARCAthens. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleni. I'll share my screen here. I hope this works. No. Hold on one second. There we go. There we go. Okay. Oh, I realized what I did. Okay, fine. Hi, my name is Elia Alba. I'm going to show you a lot of work, but I'm just going to talk mostly about my practice overall. Just to give you a little background information on me. I was born in New York, but both my parents immigrated from the from the Dominican Republic in the 50s. My grandmother came in the 40s. I think recently I've been thinking a lot about how much that has influenced my practice. Not so much Dominican culture, but they're living in the United States, and also with their historical or their own cultural baggage that they brought over here and kind of put it on to us, you know, these ideas of not feeling not from here and not from there. These are the kinds of things that I've been grappling with in my work. I'm not really focused, like I said, on cultural specificity, but more on the collective community and how these identities all intersect. I'm really interested in the in-betweenness of things and what that means, and how as an individual, you know, there's a pushback within, but there's also an idea of breaking down. I mean, I also find that idea of being in between kind of like an act of resistance, of not wanting to be boxed in, to wanting to push against a binary that says you have to be either or. I've learned that a lot through my parents, because when they migrated here, they saw themselves in one way, but when they came into the country, they had to see themselves in another way, even acknowledge, you know, their own Blackness and who they were in this country. So I've kind of dealt with this throughout my entire practice, and how I, you know, how it all manifests itself. So some of the earlier works that I did was making these doll heads, where I would put them in different scenarios to kind of manifest their relationship to that. Just gonna move a little fast since we only have 5 minutes. This is a project I did early as well in 2001, and it's called Multiplicities. And it's basically all the images of the people that passed away during 9/11. But again, one of the interesting things about that when people died in 9/11, or when people think about the United States, they only think about it in one way, not understanding that we're a multiplicity of people. And I think, but again, the United States only wants to put you in like this either or box, when we're much, much more dimensional than that. So here we have another body of work that I did in 2003 called La Haba. Here, this is a man wearing my face and dancing around. This is just a production still, dancing around with a skirt of heads of people of color. Again, I've always liked to too, like invert or think about gender, and having beings or dolls, which you'll see some of those dolls in a little bit in this later presentation, being almost genderless, and kind of, again, playing with that in-between space. This is another work. I started to also utilize masks as a way to create people that are different racially. So here you have this white face against this black arm, which I think kind of explains who I am. But even though I am racially ambiguous, it's like all part of who I am. I think that I really did that manifest in these bodysuits, which were done in 2003. Because I started to think about race as not being this kind of seamless thing. You know, you can, you know, so it's like 3 races, white, black, and mixed. I feel like the last one is me. So I photographed myself, and then I digitally manipulated the images and the color to create this, and did a transfer on the fabric. And you'll notice I've done a lot of photo transferring throughout my career. It's kind of like I do photography and I do sculptures through photo transfers. This is another project that I did in 2006 called the Larry Levan Project. And this was dealing more with a time frame of the 70s and 80s, when this DJ Larry Levan held court. And he created a sense of community amongst the Black LGBTQ community, Black and Latino LGBTQ community in New York City. I think I posted this on the website. This is called Tour Bus Family. And here I was traveling around with my family throughout Mexico, and I made them wear masks. So they're kind of like playing these mundane things, but you can't really pin down like why are they wearing these like different faces. This is part of my Pixie series that I talked about at the residency. Here you have busts. This was done in 2009. And what I did was I created these busts of people, of my friends, through a photo transfer process. So it was kind of looking at the Greek Hall of Busts in New York City at the Metropolitan, and then thinking about the African wing, because there's kind of side by side at the Metropolitan, and how thinking about representation through the classic busts, but also through a symbolic portraiture, which is kind of eminent in these kinds of cultures. These are the dolls. I started to make dolls like in around 2011, and dolls have kind of filtered in and out of my practice. This is a more recent one called Nomo. I'm running out of time, so I'm just gonna run right someone through these. This is one of the hands you saw, and here I go back to you thinking about histories, it's like a portrait of a person through history and through their own personal identity. Here's another one. A big project that I did was called the Supper Club, where I brought together different people of color to have them in conversation. I received a little bit of a pushback because people assumed I was going to be very specific on specific groups of people. I was really interested on how this community of color, you know, mostly everyone, either immigrants or through a history of enslavement, right? Or through coming together, how people of color communicate. And again, what does that mean? What does that look like? And I did that. I also did that through, not just through photography, but also through dinners and dialogues that were documented. I did like about 35 dinners. And you know, some of these dinners were great. Some of them were a little bit contentious, but I also think it helped me a lot to grow as an artist and understanding the complexities of the multiplicity that people live in general. Thank you. I hope I didn't go too over. Thank you so much.
You, and now Maro.
Hello, everybody. So I have to share my screen now. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Not yet.
No. Okay.
There we go.
Here you go. So is it fine now?
Okay.
Okay. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And I really want to thank the AVR team. It was great, fun and challenging. Thank you, Elia, Eleni, Aristides, Kate, everybody. So my work, I would like to talk about in general also about my work, and I will show you some slides. It has multiple aspects, mainly in the means of expression like watercolor, sculpture, large-scale installation, and performance. When I have the idea of an artwork, I'm trying to find the best way to express it. I'm always experimenting with different materials, but the core of my work is stable. It deals with the human relations and the acceptance of human nature, the violence of existence itself, loneliness and old age, the human body, and of course, death. One of my favorite examples is this installation that I made in 2012, entitled Happy Days, All les Beaux Jours. The title has been chosen by Paul Verlaine's homonymous poem and Samuel Beckett's work. Two red velvet mountains fabricated from dust amassed over time, made from the fluff of the velvet I shaved over the years. It looks like the pile continues to grow nonstop, constantly sucking dust. That is why they are like two mountains made of time. The time is calculated by the dust piling up. And time is also the main idea behind my metronomes. These metronome sculptures, a series of humanized metronomes in different scales. This particular installation views are from the exhibition Ex Machina held in 2010 at the Roof Tile and Brickwork Salapatas Museum, a former industrial site in Volos. Just a moment, because I have to change. Okay. It was very inspiring to learn about brick making and how much time it was needed at that time. During the same time, I created this installation, Exit Liquid. It is an in situ installation for the second edition of Remap, a biennial art initiative running at Keramikos Metaxourgio near the historic center of Athens. For this particular project, I had to work with an entire floor of an abandoned and totally vacant building from where even the radiators had been removed. This sense of absence was so intense that it gave me the urge to kind of go back in time and revitalize the space by using the building's old radiators. So I decided to connect them all together with pipes and knots and place them in the different rooms as if they were its former inhabitants. This installation explores the continuous cycles of human life and its constant transition, voluntary or not, from the luminous to its dark side. The title of the installation was inspired by Exit Ghost, a novel by Philip Roth. And now those who know my work are familiar with my watercolors and especially with my mythological animals, most often birds. I'm fascinated with their ability to fly and scratch without guilt. I'm exploring whether these powers are the necessary conditions of freedom. The flamingo that you saw and another 5 watercolors were shown at the Istanbul Modern Museum at the show Till It's Gone. This is my latest installation, Anatomie de la Liberté, presented last year in the French Embassy of Athens. And it deals with the same concept and consists of 100 porcelain hybrid human-animal feet and a vulture head hanging on the wall facing them. Even if I have done completely different things over the years, the running thread in my work is without any doubt velvet, and to be more accurate, the act of shaving velvet. It's almost like a performance taking place in the studio, but without any viewers. I first shaved velvet back in the 90s with a razor, but wasn't very satisfied with the result. Then the father of my children, who is a surgeon, gave me a surgical scalpel and told me that this could prevent me from destroying the fabric, and he was right. I've been using surgical instruments ever since, slowly discovering the fabric's net until I reach its end. Currently, I'm working on 3 different projects and I'm very excited about. The first one is funded by iPortunus and the French Institute of Athens in collaboration with CRAFT, the Research Center for the Arts and Fire and Earth in Limoges. I'm actually in the process of creating a large-scale installation composed by 8 real-sized porcelain vultures mounted on a scaffold 5 meters high. I chose vultures once again as a statement on the uncertainty of our future, misunderstood symbols, the vultures I mean, of the fear of death, these birds that once were to be found everywhere and ensured the smooth functions of the ecosystem are now on the verge of extinction. The second project I'm on is a documentary film called Aller Retour in collaboration with Béatrice Plumet and supported by the French Center for Cinematographic Writing of Moulin-d'Andé in Normandy. We rely on our correspondence, the words and the images exchange of the past 30 years to create a 2-voice film which reflects on us and make us look at time. Have we been able to stay loyal to the ideas of our youth? And last but not least, I'm preparing my solo show, starting my new collaboration with the Kaffayan Galleries here in Athens. Thank you. And I'm waiting to answer to your questions.
Thank you, Maro. First of all, I'm amazed about the image from the documentary. I think you all are. First of all, your eyebrows, so fascinating. But anyway, I'll get back to our conversation because we have lots of things to talk about. But we can get back to fashion later. Thank you for the questions. I'll try not to overlap with the questions that I have prepared. So let's start. We had 4 weeks of residency, for those who don't know. So every week we had a different topic. So the first week, the topic was food and home, and food was a recurrent thing. We'll tell you more at some other point. So Maro, I'll start with you. I'm sorry that it's coming just after your presentation. You might need to take a breath. I propose to look at the word "kiss me like you'll never kiss me again." So Maro answered in a quite unconventional manner the topic of food and home. This is a performative dinner that took place at State of Concept in Athens by invitation of 3137, which are very beloved. So you casted your body and then an artisan decorated it as if it was made out of koliva, which is a wheat-based dish we offer in Greece for the commemoration of dead. So basically you are casting your body in koliva. I imagine this body represents a notion of self. And I'd like to ask you, how did you feel that your body was devoured by art lovers? And I explicitly use the verb devour because I would like to make a link with love, or better lust, and death that is core to your work.
I think that all of my work is inspired by personal experiences, even if I do not fully realize it sometimes. That way I always give a piece of myself to art lovers, which is achieving a connection between us. My casted belly, my casted belly was full of koliva. So when I cut it open, I offered the koliva to the guests and of course to the art lovers that were there. And it was a way that I always do, because what I want to do with my work is that I'm exploring the relationship between life and death, and the way in which awareness of the inevitability of the end resonates in the quality of human life. It wasn't a typical ceremony, but more like a celebration with food, drinks, dancing, and it was about love and death.
So it was a form of birth, since you chose the koliva coming from the belly. I didn't know this detail.
It was what?
I'm sorry. I was commenting on how you were telling that the koliva were coming out of your belly, and it was a form of birth.
They were, yeah, because no one knew that they were in my belly. I was like, it was decorated, my body was decorated, my casted body that I made here in my studio was decorated with flowers and dragée and all this sugar. So all of a sudden, after the supper, because we had a great supper with soup, fish soup that we usually eat after the funerals, and then we had really very tasty sweets made of a very good pastry chef here in Greece. His name is Parliaros, and they were like genitals, female and male genitals. So each person had to eat these two. Each person had a plate with the two sweets, and they could eat all of them. They could eat them. So everybody thought that it was the end of the performance, and then all of a sudden we switched off the lights, and I came out with a huge knife and I cut off my belly, and from the belly we saw the koliva. And and there was a song playing out loud from a very well-known song in Greece that is it is about love and sin.
Which one was the song? We might take this one, right?
Ani agapη είναι αμαρτία.
Yeah, okay. I'll share it in the chat for those of you who want to enjoy it afterwards. Let's go to another supper. Elia, without any surprise, I think we should talk a little bit more about the supper club. So basically, when I first encountered the images, innocently, I thought about the symposiums that took place in ancient Greece, and its meals that are accompanied by alcohol and music, and most importantly, debates. But they were meant for young, wealthy men to enter society. And then, as we know today, this term is used for academic conferences. So in the Supper Club, you have been inviting artists, curators, and thinkers of color discussing identity and politics while eating and drinking together, as you beautifully described before. I had the chance to read the text, the transcription of your conversation that we can find in your catalog, and I was quite fascinated by the depth of these conversations. So I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit about this reversal and redistribution of power and its impact to the communities of color, and maybe expand on your original thoughts about the collective communities where identities intersect.
So the project started in 2012, and it really started with me wanting to photograph my friends. It was supposed to be a photo project. And then the dinners, those first 3 dinners were going to be context for these photographs that I was taking. So it was just like I wanted to give voice to the people I was photographing. But when I sat down all these people, I think not, you know, I just thought everyone was on the same page, and they weren't. And that really sparked the project into what it is known to today. Because after the first 3 dinners, and this is the second dinner in October 3 of 2012, I realized that as people of color, we do have certain things that are the same, you know, either like some kind of a force, you know, something is propelling you, family, to come over here, or you immigrate in a certain way. And then, you know, Black Americans, the way, you know, the whole history behind that. And so for me, that really, it kind of reminded me of home in a way, of the things that were never always said. So it's interesting that you make the reference to like something that happened like in ancient times in Greek, but this was something that I feel like sprang basically from my own family, again, like from how they collected together to kind of unpack. Again, that was kind of like the initial thing. But as the project evolved, I mean, I was photographing people, but I was also having these dinners. And I always felt like those conversations, like, you know, that in-betweenness of this, whether it's really difficult to pin down, but yet at the same time, you find those similarities. It's almost like the in-betweenness is like an act of resistance. And it's a political thing to take that kind of position. And, you know, initially I was a little bit, when I was starting to do that, I was pushed back somewhat because people would thought, well, oh, I thought it was going to be an all Black conversation, or I thought it was only going to be an all Latino conversation, or, you know, people that were South Asian. Well, how do I fit into all that? And I think that was the thing that really propelled me a lot. And I knew that people weren't going to understand it right away, because when you say people of color, it means one thing. But for me, I think that's for me more society. And so when I talk about the collective community, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Not just a community, but how do all these, the multiplicity of all these communities, how do they intersect and how do they differ? That's for me what's more fascinating about humanity.
As you were talking, I was thinking that I feel the urge to make a link between home and sharing, and you have been incredibly generous during our time together. And one of the things that you started, and I think it created kind of a tradition, was sharing your platform with other artists. And hearing you say that there's a political stance behind this kind of sharing of conversation and space and platform, I would like to ask you, how do you feel about sharing your platform, the platform in ARCAthens, but other platforms that you might have been given by museums with other artists and thinkers and people of your community? I'm referring to the first post of Lucy Hierro's work, which is
Yes.
a young American artist. And I think you know what I mean, so I'd love to hear more from you.
Yeah, I think from the beginning, it's never been about like me per se. if you saw it through the slideshow, I'm always asking people, can I take your picture? And it is a way to talk about them, you know. And as far as like Lucia and utilizing her work, I think it's also important too, as women, to share our platforms with other women, because I think regardless of how much we are seeing women come ahead, it's just a little tip. It's not enough. And I think it's important because we are not, you know, I am really the sum of my parts, and my parts is my community that's around me. And I feel it speaks a lot more about my practice, this intersection of making space for other people. And it also speaks a lot about me in the sense that like I said earlier on in the discussion, it's like I don't feel a stronghold anywhere sometimes. You know, I don't feel a stronghold in saying I'm Dominican, I wasn't born there. I mean, when I go there, people say you're not that. And then, you know, here as a person of color in the United States that has a Spanish sounding name, or even if you don't have a Spanish sounding name, you're already like coded in a certain way. So you're really not allowed to anchor. So that's also too part of the reasons why I kind of use other people, because I'm always trying to find that intersection and that connection, probably just trying to find it within myself. And I think myself is kind of like the springboard for that. But I think it is a space of resistance too. You know, you live in this country and you're thought that everything, that it's about the self, it's about the one. But when you look at older cultures, it's not about the one, it's about the community. You know, it's about how the community supports and protects itself. It's something that here, it's not really, it's not what you're taught. You're taught to go out into the world and be on your own and claim your own. But, you know, it takes a village to create, for a human being to rise. And because of how we live here, I think it is a political stance to do that.
Yeah. I can relate in my own way to what you're saying, especially with the part of sharing. But I feel that for me it was a skill that I was taught from my mother and from women that I have been growing up together. And it was one of the first things that came to my mind when Aristides and ARCAthens proposed this platform, how I would share it and with whom I would like to share it. Just to be mindful of time, I'll go to the next question, but thank you so much, Elia. It was really nice to share this moment and hear more about this work with you. So, Maro, I'll take you to Untitled, which is the two red velvet chairs that we can see in our screens. You often use furniture and domestic objects to express some complex human feelings such as loss, sadness, anger. Could you take us back to your childhood, working next to your dad who had an antique shop? How furniture persists nowadays in your work and express, I would say, existential anxieties? And ultimately, because you talked about how saving became an important part of your practice, could you tell us more about saving and if it's an act of control, or maybe, as Elia was saying before about her work, an act of resistance?
Yeah. Well, yes, as you said, I grew up in an antique shop, and I loved that. But it was like an Alibaba cave. Well, everything was really mixed. And so it was very natural for me to use all these objects that I was surrounded since I was very, very young. Often we would receive furniture from people who were emptying the home of a recently deceased parent. So I was inclined to create fantasy tale around these objects. And when I I took all this furniture, I upholstered them with red velvet, and I put these objects put these stories that I created into images. As I said, Shaving Velvet is a performance without viewers that is happening in my studio. And what fascinates me in the process is the physical fatigue, because it's not very simple to do it, even if it seems like an embroidery, it is not. So it's the physical fatigue, the sound, as well as the extremely small time window between the moment that the pile is separated from the fabric until the moment it lands on the floor. To me, it almost portrays the course of life. And when the pile is all gone, and I can see the back of the fabric, it's a sort of net that it holds the tiny little hair of the velvet, if you can imagine that. So I can see the fabric's net. This is the way I call it. So when I see this end, that forces me to stop. And shaving calms me down because it comes like a natural end of the creation process. There is the end, like a film, the end.
I'd love to hear more about the physical fatigue, but I'm afraid we don't have time right now, but we might, if there's not too many questions coming from the public, get back to this. But I'd like to hold this thought. Elia, on the second week, you posted one work that is called Ghosting in Print and D. And you talk a little bit about your hand sculpture practice. And we all know that hands have different significance and different spiritual connotations. This one is inspired from across Africa by the British explorer Verne Lovett-Komeron. If I pronounce it correctly, I'm sorry. Could you tell us how your hand sculpture practice started, and especially why did you choose the hands from the rest of the body? What do they symbolize for you? And also maybe whose hands and ultimately whose stories are you interested to tell?
So I started doing hands in 2011. As the same time I started doing dolls. It was a continuation of my photo transfer sculptures. But then I had this idea that I wanted to do the supper club, and it kind of was put on hold. And as the supper club started to wind down, because it was a 5-year project that just took a lot of energy and time, I started to pick this up again. And I mean, I've always like picked up the dolls, but with the hands, I picked it up again like in 2019. And initially they were studies of hands, like old hands that I had made. And so I just started to that. But then with this new body of work, these hands, I wanted to think about history as it relates to the individual. Now, why the hand? I mean, I think because I'm very interested in representation, I mean, I think you saw the majority of my work is dealing with the human face, some form of representation. And that's another part of my practice that I'm really interested in, how people are perceived and looked at. And so when you think of the hands, like why hands? Hands say a lot about an individual in the sense it's like you need the hands to work. How you work says a lot about who you are as an individual. So that's the main reason why the hands. And then in this case, it was my friend, Dulcina. She is from the Dominican Republic. She's living here now. But we've had multiple conversations about the racism that exists over there. Even though the country itself is a predominantly mulatto, they are mixed race, but predominantly African ancestry. And I was thinking about that and that whole idea of imprint, it's like when you culturally mix throughout centuries, you can read one way or read another, but there still is that imprint of Blackness in us, in the majority of us on the island. So that's why she has these kind of like ghost-like figures, like hieroglyphics. It's like it exists in our DNA past, but it's still very much part of who we are. And, you know, if you look at the Dominican culture, you know, it comes out in the food and the music, you know, in the culture. It's very much embedded in the culture. And so that's why I chose, you know, her and for this particular narrative. And so the idea of ghosting, it's the idea of erasing, because it is it is part of the culture, this wanting, and it's, you know, it's been written about through centuries. And it's something that I think younger generations are grappling with and not wanting to ghost, you know, on the contrary, wanting to embrace and understand that, you know, that particular history. And then imprint is about that. It's just imprinting on the body. And then, and D is her. Like normally if I use a face, I'll give it the full name, but this time I wanted to like keep it a little open and just give the initial. So in this body of work, it'll say whatever the title is, and D or and G or and whoever that is. And so I was looking at in this book that you reference about Africa was done in 1877. And this was like images of fettered slaves or slaves that had, you know, like chains around them or whatever. So when I use the images, I just took those chains off because they kind of look like they're dancing and marching, you know, because we're not dealing with slavery in that, you know, in that way. I mean, there's other ways where people are enslaved, but it's more, you know, insidious, I think, and more covert. But yeah, that's kind of what these hands are about. This particular hand is about.
This is fascinating. I was just thinking of the hands, like the body, as a living history in a way, because we often talk about oral history and the resistance to the archive. So in a way, you merge all these traditions and histories together beautifully. It's one of the works that I really, really love. I'm sorry, I'm just going back to my notes, and I'll just go ahead with the next question to Maro, which is about the work Head Over Heels, Narcissus. Maro, we cannot finish this meeting without talking about your practice related to animals, especially vultures, that you briefly mentioned during your presentation. You are always giving an emphasis to the nails and the beaks. Can you tell us more about this fascination, but especially about the nails and the beaks and the means of defense of these animals? And also you have another pattern that we have seen in your work where you merge animal enemies, animals that normally attack and devour each other. So it would be nice if you can tell us also about this symbiosis that we witness in these works.
Okay, as I said, I'm really fascinated with birds. And I'm fascinated because it's like they are immune to time because they are flying and they beat gravity. So I'm also fascinated because they can use without any guilt their claws, their beaks, and their wings. So when I draw, I paint, I shave, I sculpt birds or parts of their bodies, I'm referring to nature, to ecosystems, and of course to human nature that is part of all this. Most of the birds that I draw are indebted to Audubon in their structure and scientific approach. And so when the symbiosis of that kind of what you said, Eleni, is a proposition for a parallel universe. So when I put, two animals that they are normally are enemies, but they are together, it's a parallel, for me, it's a parallel universe foretelling the dystopia that will be the world of our near future. Now, this work, Narcissus, is, again, a vulture with an enormous beak, but with tiny little claws. Its feet are really very skinny and very, small. And it's an installation because you can see the empty frame of the mirror. And the title, as we said, is Narcissus. So this bird is waiting to capture its victim in the empty mirror frame in order to reflect its figure. This piece explores the codependent relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. I cannot say this word. The perpetrator. Okay, I said it. It's difficult for me. And yes.
Just be mindful of the time. I want to ask one last question to Alba, and then to Q&A. If somebody is unmuted, please mute yourselves. Elia, I'd like to ask you, I'll change a little bit the script, and I'd like to very humbly ask you to navigate us through the work, Red Shoes. I think it's a very complex work in terms of autobiographical elements and sociopolitical issues linked to labor and biopolitics issues linked to motherhood. But I'd prefer to hear directly from you because it's an important work and we didn't have the chance to talk about this during our internal meetings.
Here, I'm gonna mute. Okay. Hi. This work, I did it in 1999. I started it in 98. At the time, my son was just like a year old. And I actually had just received the Studio Museum in Harlem residency. So, it was a lot going on. And so when I started, after I became, or before I became pregnant, I read the book Mary Kelly. Unfortunately, I can't remember, but she did this really huge project in the 70s that dealt with motherhood. But it was actually the act of motherhood. Like what are the acts that you're doing? The different, she even framed diapers with feces of her baby. It really made me start thinking a lot about myself and the kind of, where I was, I was starting, I came to art in my early 30s. So I was just fresh starting out, and I wonder how all that was going to play. And at the same time, how that played out with my mother, who worked in the garment industry for such a long time. And so it was thinking about myself, her, as well as a mother, and how this idea of sewing and labor came together. Also around that time, there was huge discussions about, or discoveries of sweatshops, not only in New York City, but the big discussion around sweatshops was also happening at this time. So so I decided, I was already experimenting with fabrics and dyeing them, with pigments and stuff. And then actually my mother helped me do this project. So we created these, always these happy accidents. And one of my playings with just like small pieces of fabrics, I realized when it hardened, it looked like a little shoe. And then I just went from there. And my mom actually helped me sew a lot of those little bags that became these shoes that were made from pigment and adhesive. And I just started making them. And as I laid them out on the ground, they became flags, almost like unfortunately, I don't have a good image of it. This is just like a detail. And so when I was thinking about motherhood, and thinking about the fantasy behind the fashion industry, that's why some of them look like up close, like fairy slippers. They look like they can almost look like women's body parts too. From a distance, if you saw it from a distance, it looked like a bed of roses. It could look like a flag because of different tones of red. So, you know, they became more than just like baby booties. It made me think about like this idea of the labor that women put into raising their children. And it's represented through the knitting of baby booties, but also the fantasy that is projected on, you know, the fantasy that's projected on through fashion. So, you know, in art, you see a lot of shoes that are like representative, you know, but this isn't so much. These are more about not so much the babies that wear the shoes, but there really stands in for the people that work in these industries, mothers and laborers. And so again, dealing with these ideas of acts of resistance, when you see, when I'm supposed to be getting, the museum is supposed to be sending me slides from 1999 that I just didn't take any great pictures. You have a sense that they're marching towards you as you know, like as a site of resistance. And yeah.
Thank you so much for your patience. All I thought that it was important to hear about this work from Elia directly. So Kat, Q&A, it's the time. Sorry. Thank you, Elia.
You're welcome.
Okay, great. So we would love to open up the floor to any questions from the audience. We have one of our past fellows just chatted us, Irene Linardaki. Thank you so much all for your wonderful work and sharing your time with us. I see firsthand that ARCAthens is highlighting the work of so many wonderful women. And any other questions? We had a few other gracious comments in the chat. Feel free to either type it in or just type in that you'd like to ask it yourself, and you can unmute yourself.
Maybe I could say that if the audience is not coming up with questions, I have a feeling that Eleni, you might have a couple more.
Can go on forever.
Go on forever, but I encourage the audience to come in with questions or comments. I love seeing so many of you here. You may not know each other, but it's a room full of giants, and I'm so happy to see you. And also, Elia, after all this, we're going to have a chat because my mother ran what is called a sweatshop in Chicago. She was a Greek immigrant, and that was her business. She learned, she was a tailor by craft. She was really, really good and a huge influence on my development and my work. So we have a lot of commonalities that we should go over during a nice supper here in the Bronx. Meanwhile, please come with questions, and if not, Eleni, feel free to ask more since I know you have some more.
I have the feeling that, and I feel bad about that, but I cut Maro when she was talking about the work of Narcissus, the Head Over Heels. And there was one question that we didn't have the chance to see that had to do with the mirror. We talked about the vultures, but not the mirror. So maybe we could go back to this just for a few brief moments. Would that be okay, Maro?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, of course. So, yeah, I would say that later on, I have to say that I was not really inspired by this quote, this book, let's say, of Virginia Woolf. Well, I was invited to participate to a group show from Kika Kyriakakou here in Athens on the Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. So I read the whole book, of course, and I found a phrase which I thought that it could really, it goes very well with this particular installation, and is that women have served all these centuries as looking glasses, possessing the magic and delicious power of reflecting the figure of man as twice at twice its natural size. So when I said before that it was this piece explores a codependent relationship, it was also about that. That doesn't mean that it's always the man from the side of vulture and the women in the empty frame. It can, because all these two roles can change.
Great. I'm sorry, my attention was also at the chat because I see there's some comments and questions coming in. And Maro, I think the next one is for you as well. I don't know if Carol wants to talk or I should read from the chat, whatever you feel like.
I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was very inspired by a story Maro told in one of your dialogues during the weeks of the residency. She told an alternative story of Helen of Troy, in which there was no actual Helen going to Troy with Paris. It was a created wraith or imposter. And I wanted to ask you, Maro, how that story influenced any particular works or your thinking in general. I love that story so much.
This story, we have to say that it's in Euripides' tragedy. It's Euripides that changed the story and said it's not the fault of Eleni that the War of Troy happened. It's the fault of everybody else, but not of Eleni. So I created this velvet sculpture piece called Eleni, which I don't know, I think I posted it, no?
You did.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that was the question. How, I don't know if I understood. That was your question, isn't it?
Yes, that was my question. Was how does that?
And of course, there is this poem of Seferis called Eleni that is talking about that as well. So this sculpture is a torso of a woman from the back, and her legs are she doesn't have only two, she has more, and they are griffons that are full of the fabric spile that I shaved, and it's like the guilt, it's the heaviness, but she can fly. She tries anyway to fly, because we can see that her, let's say, hands are open, wide open, and she's trying to fly.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
We had also an amazing moment with Maro that we did an Instagram live together. The first minutes are hilarious, but there's also interesting stories that she has been telling me that day. If you want to go back to the Instagram curatorial reflections that we did for like 4 Saturdays. Is there another question? I see some comments in the chat.
You have from Irene Leonardaki. So I don't know, Irene, if you want to ask yourself or have us read it.
I cannot. Sorry. I'm cooking at the same time. Sorry, but I have my full attention. So I did observe. I loved listening to both of them. I knew Mara's work, but I don't think I had heard all the stories. And I heard so much coming out of their childhood. So many references to their childhood. I also heard a lot of stuff in Mara's work that came out of this reptilian brain we're talking about, but I think that's like a long subject, but very interesting, and I can always look into that. But the childhood thing, I was very interested in that, because I was wondering, of course, many artists refer to their childhoods, and I was wondering when in your life, when in your career as an artist, did you start working on this subject? Because, you know, we don't necessarily explore it when we're 20, I think. That's it. That's how I end my question. Sorry.
I think it has I don't think these things happen like over, like you say, like right away in your 20s. I think it happens, and I think Maro will agree, as you're progressing through your art. And, you know, I mean, I feel like at my point, I've been looking back a lot and understanding that a lot of these things stem from our childhood, and how, you know, how we're kind of indoctrinated into the world and how that reflects back on us. I mean, I think it's beautiful, you know, Maro, that her dad was an antique dealer. I got a little bit of jealousy there. I was like, I wish my dad was an antique dealer or worked in antiques. So yeah, I mean, I just think, I don't think, I mean, I can't speak for Maro, but I didn't say, okay, I'm going to talk about my childhood. I'm just like revisiting. Actually, this residency in the last month has made me revisit, you know, my work, because I said I should bring out the old, because, and I realized that a lot of it is stemming from that childhood place. So it's not ever, if you read any old statements of mine, it's never saying this is about this. It's only in the last year or so that I've been understanding it from that point of view.
I just wanted to say that it's, for me, I agree with Elia, but it's like if it is always in you, and there are some, at some point of your life that certain aspects come out, and definitely while we're growing up, we're getting older, our vision is changing, because it is changing. We're getting older, so we can work with these elements of childhood in different ways.
And we have another question from.
Can I just interrupt and say something too, because I feel I want to answer Eleni's question. I've been working with fabrics for a while, and it wasn't until graduate school when they kept pressing, why are you using materials? Why are you using fabrics? Why, you know, the whole nature of graduate school is this kind of analysis, right? But I hadn't ever thought about it. And then I was like, of course, I grew up every day after school going to my mother's shop and picking up the fabrics from the floor and making collages. And then it all just came together. So I thought I should mention that it wasn't until people were beating me over the head, why are you using these materials, that I was able to connect the dots that were so inspirational for me, having to do with labor, having to do with my mother, having to do with what she had created and the materiality of it all. So I appreciate your question.
And we have another question coming in from Nana Sakini. I don't know if you'd like to ask it yourself, or I'll give you a minute to jump on in case.
Okay, hi everybody. I don't know if you listen to me clearly. I am with pajamas and I'm too narcissus to open the camera. So, well, what I saw and what I was saying is that to Maro and Elia, and I was wondering if you saw that connection and if you had a conversation about it. I saw that there is a total connection between the work that you have spoken about earlier with the little shoes and the one with the half human, half, you know, the hybrid. Because for me, you know, it's like they're speaking about more or less the same things, even in terms of, you know, maybe Maro wasn't speaking about labor. Maybe it wasn't her intention, but the way that she made all these small feet creatures walking as a march on the floor, it involves a labor in order to do them. And also, you know, the fact that the shoes protect us by, you know, in a way defending us, and then the nails, I don't know, I found a total connection between these two works, and I was wondering if you saw it. Even the fact that, you know, the shoes from a distance, they become abstract, and also the feet, they become abstract if you see them from a distance as a whole march, you know, this, yeah, I don't know, I just saw it, it was very clear to me, the connection. Thank you. And thank you for the discussion and the whole thing.
Thank you, Nana.
We do
Thank
have,
you, Nana.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Maro.
I have something lingering if we have a minute before we close this conversation. I have a very unsophisticated question that I have been waiting to ask since the beginning of the residency. I tried to do, you know, the most complicated one at the beginning, but you know, there's something quite basic. You're both using the color red a lot in your work. And if somebody's looking at the Instagram, we're going to see that part of this very dynamic conversation is the color, and especially the color red. So I would like to ask you what it means to your work, or when it comes to your work. Yeah, just a very simple question, but it's on my mind since the beginning.
The red is like representative of the body, you know, body, and it's kind of what I associate with the body. I don't feel like I used red that much, but the shoes were a lot. So yes, they were, and so they were definitely a representative of the body. And blood, because I was thinking there was female parts too, I'm going to admit. So yes, with that. And then, you know, in Chinese culture, the red is a symbol of good luck too. And it just goes into, with me thinking about the intersection of different cultures in my work. So thinking about the red bags that I presented in the Instagram story.
Thank you, Elia. Mara, is there a comment from your side? And
Yes, well, back in the 90s, when I first shaved, I shaved my first velvet, for me, it was, I mean, I couldn't even imagine to shave another color. It was only red. And this is because at that time I was shaving parts of human bodies, and so when I was shaving the velvet and this fabric spiral was down on the earth, on the floor, it was like a butcher place in Athens, Greece. So my imagination was really flying, and slowly I am using other colors too. And I feel relieved about that, to tell you the truth.
thank you. We're over time, so we'll hand it to Kat and Aristides. Thank you.
Okay, so we are over time, but last call for anybody, if they have any comment or question while we have our three fellows with us. And if not, maybe I can just thank everybody. Thank you, dear Elia, dear Maro, dear Eleni, for a spectacular residency and this very engaging synopsis. Congratulations to you, and ARCAthens is very grateful that you participated in this program. It's been a real pleasure to see your dialogue blossom. I want to thank you, Kat, and everyone on the ARCAthens team, particularly the board of directors, of whom we have several present here. Without your passionate support, our programming would not be possible. And thank you to you all for attending the synopsis, making it a wonderful conversation. We'll be making some major announcements in January regarding the next AVR, the next virtual residency, as well as our new program, the ARCAthens Mentorship Program. If you're not on our mailing list, please visit our website at arcathens.org to join. And if you would like to support our programming, please visit our website support page to make an easy, safe, and tax-deductible gift. I want to wish you all happy holidays as we bid farewell to a year of challenge, but also a year of knowledge and clarity. In that spirit of love and unity, intelligence, and creative activism, let's bring together equity, justice, and beauty and joy into our new year. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.